If you are between 55 and 64 years old, a new HMRC rule is about to change how your ISA money is allowed to move, and most people planning their retirement have not heard of it yet. From the 6th of April 2027, if you are under 65, you will no longer be able to transfer money out of a stocks and shares ISA into a cash ISA. You will also be capped at £12,000 a year in new cash ISA subscriptions, down from the £20,000 you can put in today. That is not a small print change. It means that if a market drop happens after that date and you are still fully invested, you cannot simply move your savings somewhere safer inside the wrapper. You would either have to ride out the fall in the market or take the money out completely, and that means losing the tax-free status you spent years building. I've watched this happen to careful savers who did everything the old advice told them to do, and then found the rules had quietly shifted under their feet. This is not about anyone being careless with money. It is about the goalposts moving right as people reach the point in life where they can least afford a bad year in the market. A lot of people are searching for the most expensive ISAs and mistakes retirees are making right now, and this transfer rule is exactly why that search matters. I am going to walk through 4 of those mistakes, starting with this transfer change, because it affects how you should be positioning your ISA well before the 6th of April 2027 arrives. If you are planning to live off your ISA in retirement and want to stay ahead of changes like this one, subscribe to the channel. We focus only on UK retirement, so the fine print like this does not catch you out later. Here is the mechanism behind that transfer rule, because understanding why it exists changes how urgent it actually is for you. Right now, you can put your full £20,000 ISA allowance into a stocks and shares ISA, let it sit for a year, and then transfer the whole balance into a cash ISA whenever you want, with no limit on how much of it moves. From the 6th of April 2027, that door closes for anyone under 65. HMRC is calling this an anti-circumvention rule, and the logic is straightforward once you see it. Right now, someone could technically hold shares on paper while quietly treating the wrapper as a savings account, moving it to cash the moment they got nervous. The government wants people under 65 to actually hold shares for the long term, not use the stocks and shares wrapper as a detour to a bigger cash allowance than the new £12,000 cap allows. This isn't about you being bad with money. It is about the goalposts being moved just as you are approaching the point in life where you actually need to start playing it safer. Picture what that looks like with real numbers attached. Say you are holding £100,000 in a stocks and shares ISA and the market falls 20% in the months after this rule takes effect. That is £20,000 gone on paper. Today you could transfer what is left into a cash ISA and stop the bleeding while you decide what to do next. After the 6th of April 2027, if you are under 65, you cannot do that inside the ISA at all. You are stuck riding it out in the market, or you withdraw the money and lose the tax shelter permanently, which is the real cost hiding behind this rule. According to HM Treasury's own fact sheet on the 2027 ISA reforms, this transfer ban applies specifically to people under 65, while savers 65 and over keep the full £20,000 cash allowance and the ability to move funds freely. That age line matters, because it means the years right before you turn 65 are exactly when this rule bites hardest. At the same point in life when most people are trying to reduce their exposure to a market crash, not lock themselves into one. Think about what that means if you are 62 right now, still a few years from drawing your pension in full and holding most of your retirement savings in shares, because that is what worked for the last decade. The transfer flexibility you are used to having simply will not be there anymore. But the transfer ban is not the only place people are quietly losing money. There is a second mistake happening right now, one that is costing typical retirees somewhere close to £3,500 a year without them ever noticing it on a statement. Since you cannot fix this after the 6th of April 2027, the only window you actually have is the one running up to it. Call it the bridge window, the months between now and that date. And it is the last real chance to rearrange an ISA that is still built for a set of rules that will not exist much longer. The framework worth using here is simple to picture, even if it sounds a little like something from a textbook. You are essentially splitting your ISA into two layers. Layer 1 holds around 2 years of your expected living costs, sitting in the cash ISA where it cannot lose value overnight. Layer 2 holds the remainder, staying invested in the stocks and shares ISA, where it has time to ride out the ordinary ups and downs of the market. It is not a complicated system. It is closer to how you would plan a household budget than an investment strategy. I used to tell people to keep their ISA entirely in shares right up until the day they retired, on the theory that time in the market beats timing the market. I was wrong to leave it that simple. With the 2027 rules in place, if you do not build that cash layer before the transfer door closes, you lose the ability to do it later without giving up the tax-free status on the money you move. The cash layer earns its place for a very concrete reason. Put £100,000 into a cash ISA paying 4% and you earn £4,000 in interest over the year. Your personal savings allowance only shields the first £1,000 of interest from tax if that money sat outside an ISA. Outside the wrapper, the taxman would take roughly £600 of what is left. Inside the ISA, every pound of that £4,000 stays yours. No forms, no tax return entry, nothing to calculate each spring. That is the appeal of cash, and it is real. But sitting entirely in cash brings its own quiet cost, one that does not show up as clearly on a statement, and it is worth understanding before you decide how much to move into that layer. Think about what happens to £100,000 sitting untouched in a cash ISA over the years you spend in retirement. Interest keeps the number on the screen from shrinking, but prices around you do not stand still either. The council tax bill goes up, the energy bill goes up, a weekly food shop that cost you a certain amount 5 years ago costs noticeably more today. Cash protects the number. It does not protect what that number can actually buy. That is exactly why the split matters more than either extreme. All shares leaves you exposed the moment you need to draw money during a downturn. All cash quietly loses ground to the cost of living every single year you hold it. The two-layer approach is not about picking a winner between growth and safety. It is about giving each one a job it is actually suited for, the cash covering what you need soon, the shares covering what you will need years from now. So how much should actually sit in that cash layer, and how do you know if inflation is already eating into the rest faster than you realize? That is worth putting real numbers against, because the answer surprises most people who assume cash is automatically the safe choice. To know whether cash or shares deserves more weight in that split, it helps to look at what actually happened last time UK markets fell hard. During the 2008 financial crisis, the FTSE 100 dropped roughly a third of its value in a matter of months, and it took around 2 years for the index to claw back most of that loss. Anyone who held shares through that period and simply stayed invested came out the other side largely intact. Anyone who needed to sell in the middle of it locked in a loss they never had to take. Now put that next to the other side of the risk, the one that feels safer but works more slowly. According to the ONS National Life Tables, a 65-year-old man in the UK today can expect to live, on average, another 18.7 years. That is not a small number to plan around. If you move everything into a cash ISA at 65 because you are worried about a repeat of 2008, you are essentially planning for an 18.7-year stretch, where inflation gets to work on your savings every single day, with nothing in the portfolio built to outpace it. That erosion plays out like this in practice. At the latest ONS inflation rate of around 2.9% a year, £100,000 sitting untouched loses roughly half its real purchasing power in about 24 years. You would still see the number £100,000 on your statement. What that number can actually buy you, a car, a boiler replacement, a comfortable Christmas for the grandchildren, would be worth roughly half what it is today. so neither extreme really holds up under its own weight. All shares can force you into a bad sale during a crash. All cash quietly loses to inflation over a retirement that could easily run past 18 years. The real test is not which one is right in theory. It is how each one performs for you personally when a downturn actually lands on your specific retirement date, not just as an abstract average. Let's make this concrete with one retirement that could easily be yours. David is 62, plans to retire at 66 when his state pension starts, and holds £150,000 in a stocks and shares ISA, the bulk of his retirement savings. Picture the version of David who ignored all of this. The market drops 15% sometime after the 6th of April 2027, right after the transfer ban is already in place. He is still fully invested, because he never got around to building a cash layer. Then his car needs replacing and a few bills land at once, and he needs £15,000 in a hurry. With no cash buffer inside the ISA and no way to shift funds into one, his only option is to sell shares while the market is down. That sale locks in a loss of around £2,250 on the money he withdraws, a loss he can never get back, because those particular pounds are no longer invested to recover when the market eventually does. Now picture the version of David who used the bridge window before the rules changed. In late 2026, while transfers were still allowed, he moved £30,000 into a cash ISA, roughly 2 years of the spending he expected to need. When the same 15% drop hits in 2027, he draws his £15,000 from that cash layer instead. His shares stay exactly where they are, untouched, free to recover over the next couple of years the way markets usually do after a fall like that. The difference between those two versions of David is not luck, and it is not about who is smarter with money. It comes down to something called sequence of returns risk, the simple fact that selling investments during a downturn, rather than a recovery, can shorten how long a retirement portfolio actually lasts by as much as 7 years in some cases. It is not the size of the fall that does the damage, it is being forced to sell into it. That is why the timing of your transfers, not just the interest rate on offer, is the part worth getting right before the 6th of April 2027, but timing the ISA itself is only half the job. There is a smaller, easier mistake that trips people up on the paperwork side, and it is the one currently triggering the most unnecessary headaches with HMRC. Something about this rarely gets said out loud. A lot of the retirees losing money to these rules are not confused about the mechanics. They understand transfers, allowances, and tax wrappers well enough. What actually stops them is not knowledge. It is the sheer number of moving parts. Flexible ISAs behave differently from non-flexible ones, the age line at 65 changes what applies to you, and the rules keep shifting every couple of years. Faced with all of that at once, a lot of people simply freeze and do nothing, which quietly becomes the most expensive choice of all. It is completely normal to feel like the system is working against you when the rules change this often. You are not behind, and you have not missed some obvious step everyone else already knew about. You are dealing with a set of rules that is genuinely more complicated than it needs to be, and freezing in front of that is a reasonable reaction, not a personal failing. The way through it is not to master the entire tax code in one sitting. It is to focus on one thing at a time, starting with the official ISA transfer form and nothing else. Never withdraw the money yourself and try to move it manually between providers. That single habit, taking cash out and redepositing it elsewhere, is the most common way people accidentally lose the tax-free status they spent years building, because withdrawn money only goes back in against your current year's allowance, not as a protected transfer. I spent 3 hours on hold with a major UK bank not long ago, helping a friend track down a transfer that had gone missing in the system. Even people who work in this area every day find the process frustrating. That is not a reason to avoid it. It is a reason to get the paperwork right the first time, rather than trying to fix it after the money has already left the wrapper. So this is what actually doing something about it looks like, broken into steps you can work through one at a time rather than all at once. Start by checking whether your current cash ISA is flexible. A flexible ISA lets you withdraw money and put it back within the same tax year without it counting against your annual allowance a second time. A non-flexible one does not offer that room, and knowing which one you have changes how carefully you need to plan withdrawals. It is usually one line in your provider's terms or a quick phone call, and it is worth confirming before you move a single pound. Next, if you are under 65, work out your own de-risking number for the next few years. That means adding up roughly how much you expect to spend from your ISA over the next 2 to 3 years, because that figure is what belongs in the cash layer, not a guess or a round number picked out of habit. Then, if you decide a transfer from shares into cash makes sense for you, start that process before the 31st of December 2026 rather than waiting. Providers tend to see a rush of transfer requests in the months right before a deadline like the 6th of April 2027, and processing delays are common when everyone moves at once. Starting early gives you room if something goes wrong with the paperwork. The timing itself carries real value, not just peace of mind. Moving £20,000 into a cash ISA now, while the full allowance still applies to you, gives you £8,000 more capacity than waiting until after the cap drops to £12,000 on the 6th of April 2027. That is not a small gap. It is close to a 40% difference in how much tax-free cash space you get to use. And it disappears the moment the new rule takes effect. If you think these age-based rules feel strict, they get even more specific once you consider what happens to an ISA after you are no longer the one holding it, when it eventually passes to your children. We have covered 4 mistakes here: the transfer ban taking effect on the 6th of April 2027, the quiet cost of sitting entirely in cash, the danger of selling shares in a downturn instead of drawing from a cash layer, and the paperwork mistake of moving money manually instead of using a proper transfer. An ISA is not just a savings account with a nice tax label attached to it. It is closer to a legal shield around money you have spent decades building. But a shield only protects you if you are holding it the right way, and right now, a lot of the old advice about how to hold it is quietly going out of date. None of this requires becoming an expert in tax law. It requires looking at your own ISA once, honestly, and asking whether it is still built for the rules that are about to apply to you, or for the rules that used to. If this helped you make sense of what is changing, subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide. We focus entirely on UK retirement, so changes like this one do not catch you off guard later. Do not let a rule change you had time to prepare for become the reason you end up working an extra year you did not plan on.